Venezuela is undergoing some of its worst moments. This disaster is so huge that what was once one of the largest and most powerful oil companies in the world, PDVSA, is now practically bankrupt and has more problems, including extracting the oil. So how does the oil company with the largest reserves in the world have problems extracting it? Well, that's what we're going to talk about in today's video. Folks, I think we all probably know it. Venezuela is undergoing a true catastrophe, and not only an economic one. It is, above all, a humanitarian catastrophe. It's such a huge disaster that in recent years it has caused between 3 and 4 million Venezuelans to flee the country. That's more than 1 in every 10 inhabitants. And the truth is, we're not really surprised by this. See, according to the latest statistics, 87% of the population, that's nearly 9 out of every 10 Venezuelans, are poor. And on top of that, most of Venezuela's population, 60%, isn't only poor, they live in extreme poverty. But not only that, Venezuela is burning down. According to data from the Venezuelan Social Conflict Observatory, in 2017, almost 10,000 protests were registered throughout the country, more than 27 per day. And what's even worse than this? Well, according to information from Attorney General Luis Ortega, since 2015, the police, the National Guard, the army, and the different intelligence services have killed more than 8,000 people. Of course, most of them were opposers to the regime. Crisis, hunger, violence, repression, everything indicates that Venezuela will soon undergo a refugee crisis of colossal dimensions. Because let's be clear, dear viewer, let's be honest, things they're not looking good. You see, for years, the Bolivarian revolution of Chavez, Maduro and company had a great ally. And no, we're not talking about Cuba or Russia or any other country, as a matter of fact. We're talking about oil, the black gold that financed the revolution. For a long time, the huge income this raw material brought financed all of the regime's policies, and they didn't really care about the consequences. So, factories were closing, foreign investment was fleeing the country, but it didn't matter because, well, they had loads and loads of money from all of that oil. But all of that, well, it's about to end. Yep, Venezuela does have a lot of oil, but one thing is having oil and another thing is being able to exploit said oil. Did you know that PDVSA, the national oil company, is practically about to collapse? Well, listen up.
The fall of PDVSA.
Petroleum of Venezuela, PDVSA, was created by government decree in 1976 to integrate all the oil assets that the state had nationalized. This company soon became a world-class colossus. And you know why? Well, among other things, because this company has the largest reserves on the planet. And when we say large, we mean large. There are more than 300 billion barrels of oil certified here, more than the reserves of Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Russia, or any other oil power. Now, yes, it is true, and we have said it on this channel before, Venezuelan oil doesn't have the highest quality, but that doesn't really matter. We're talking about a huge amount of resources, almost 20% of the world's known reserves. And the fact is that this company, PDVSA, peaked in production in 1998, a year before Hugo Chavez came to power, at which time the company was extracting 3.5 million barrels per day. Since then, things have changed a lot. By the year of Hugo Chavez's death in 2013, production had decreased by 1 million barrels per day. So could it be that Hugo Chavez's Bolivarian government didn't like oil? Could it all be part of a twisted plan to diversify the Venezuelan economy? Well, no. In fact, it's quite the opposite.
Y fíjate que a pesar de todo, nunca nosotros dejamos de mandarle a ustedes 1,5 millones de barriles diarios de petróleo. Es un negocio, es el comercio.
Hugo Chavez wanted to increase production to 5 million barrels. The problem was that they simply weren't able to do it. But if you think that that commander's results were bad, you haven't seen anything yet, because since Nicolás Maduro came to power, production has sunk to 1.8 million barrels. That means, while countries like the United States have doubled their production, Venezuela produces half as much oil as when the revolution began. So hardly a fantastic success. And if you think that that's the worst of it, get prepared to think again, because the future is looking a lot more bleak. So at this point in the video, you might be wondering, well, what on earth is going on with PDVSA?
The keys of a disaster foretold.
PDVSA's history, dear viewer, has been the story of a disaster foretold. The best example of that is the Paraguana refining complex, which consists of 3 crude oil refineries and is one of the 3 largest complexes of its kind in the entire world. For years, it was Venezuela's industrial pride, the crown jewel, if you will. However, today, it barely operates at 15% capacity, and all kinds of accidents tend to happen. Well, why is this?
There's no maintenance. They sucked everything they could from PDVSA without investing. There's nothing left to squeeze. Pablo Cespedes, plant operator.
And this is certainly not an extraordinary case. At the end of October, also in the Paraguana refining complex, the Amway refinery spilled over 200,000 gallons of gasoline into the bay. A few days later, another refinery in the complex, the Cardon refinery, suffered a fire that firemen could barely contain because they didn't even have the foam to fight the flames. And on, and on, and on it goes. Because the truth is that most of the oil companies' facilities are in terrible condition. So how do you think that they reached this point?
Construyendo patria. Paso a paso vamos transitando el camino.
You see, the Chavez government always saw PDVSA as a kind of dairy cow from which they could get all the resources they needed for the revolution. The problem is that the oil industry requires lots and lots of investments, and these are investments that the Venezuelan government simply did not want to make. Even with that fact, it still indebted the company to the brim. And by the way, do you know how indebted this company is today? Well, listen to this. We're not talking about 1 or 5 billion. We're talking about 90 billion American dollars. A fortune so big that Venezuela could have even bought multinationals like Goldman Sachs, Nike, or Siemens. That is just an insane amount of debt. But do you think that's all that's going on? Well, not even close. They also used the company to plug in, place, and hire thousands and thousands of supporters, friends, and family members, from which PDVSA lost even more resources. And if that wasn't enough, the Chavez regime also placed unskilled and inexperienced personnel in management positions while dismissing and driving away thousands and thousands of experienced employees because of their political beliefs. Yes, this is how PDVSA ran out of money and ran out of human resources. And now, with all of this information, we can really understand why oil production is dropping in Venezuela. And of course, the consequences of all of this, well, they're terrible for the country.
The consequences.
Oil is essential for the Venezuelan economy, especially because there's no other industry left standing. Their dependence on oil is so great that it generates 95% of all foreign currency profits in dollars. And these currencies, dear viewer, are what Venezuela needs to be able to import food, medicine, gasoline. Yes, indeed. Venezuela still today has to import gasoline as well as pretty much everything else. But of course, as oil production keeps plummeting, the country is able to import less things. And you know what? Since Venezuela is producing nothing and has to import everything, the dwindling oil money is no longer enough to pay all the bills. But of course, as you all know, when you spend more money than you make, money goes away. And that's precisely what's happening to Venezuela, which according to some calculations barely has $10 billion in foreign reserves, which is their lowest number in 40 years. This means that when the money is gone, they won't be able to import anything else than what they can buy with the money they make from the oil, which is decreasing. So you're probably beginning to see the problem. Now, we previously talked about on VisualPolitik how Nicolás Maduro's government has tried to buy time by resorting to international markets to issue debt at pretty scandalous rates, sometimes as high as 40%. Obviously, issuing debt with implicit rates of 40% can only mean future ruin. And in any case, that's actually no longer a possibility. In fact, both the Venezuelan government and PDVSA are incurring defaults. That is, they are not paying their debts.
S&P downgrades 7 sovereign Venezuelan bonds to the default level.
Another route they attempted was that of the Chinese rescue, and the Chinese answered and placed more than $23 billion in loans on the table. But everything has a limit, and they are no longer willing to continue giving more money and getting nothing in return. I mean, just check this out.
The Chinese oil company Sinopec sues PDVSA for unpaid debts.
The situation, dear viewer, is so desperate that the Cuban government has decided to seize the 49% that PDVSA held in a Cuban refinery as compensation for their unpaid debts. Yep, you heard that right. Not even Cuba trusts the Maduro regime. And it was all of this that led to the latest Chavista event, the Petro.
The Venezuelan cryptocurrency.
As we've seen, with every day that passes, the Venezuelan government has less access to foreign currency, which is obviously a huge problem because without foreign currency, they can't import. But based on this problem, an idea came up. Cryptocurrency is in fashion, so why not launch their own cryptocurrency? Well, they did, and they called it the Petro.
La creación de la criptomoneda, el Petro, que hemos lanzado nosotros, sustentado en riquezas petroleras certificadas y que muy pronto vamos a sustentar con riquezas de oro, de diamantes certificadas de la República Bolivariana de Venezuela.
Of course, the Petro is a very particular currency, among other things, because it's controlled by Maduro's government. Under these conditions, let me ask you a question. Would you be willing to invest a single euro or a single dollar into this new cryptocurrency? In other words, would you put your money in the hands of the Venezuelan government? Well, you can bet that I wouldn't, not even a single penny. And precisely because no one in their right mind would do such a thing, the Venezuelan government has had to back this particular cryptocurrency with oil. That is, each Petro will be guaranteed by a barrel of oil from the Venezuelan oil reserves that, of course, are still underground. In this way, the Petro's value is apparently linked to the value of this raw material.
Y hoy está naciendo el niño feliz, el Petro. La criptomoneda para enfrentar a Superman, que no ha podido ni podrá con nosotros.
Does that sound any better? Well, hold on for a moment, because we cannot forget a detail. A very, very important detail. The oil reserves are, of course, under the control of the government. And I wonder, do you really think that this government is going to exploit those reserves? And even if they did, do you think they'd really back the Petro? And what about the support rate? Wouldn't the resources generated simply be spent? Wouldn't they impose restrictions or regulations that would benefit them? And above all, why take the risk of investing in Petros? And by the way, another important point here, that Petro is not convertible. That is to say, even though it is supposedly backed by oil barrels, you can never exchange it for the barrel or any title that proves a right over those barrels.
The Petro is a cryptocurrency that isn't crypto, that is backed by reserves that aren't reserves. This can only be monetized with a production that is collapsing and issued by a government that is in default and has no dollars. Francisco Monaldi, professor at the Rice University's Baker Institute in Houston.
Folks, the Petro doesn't seem to be anything more than a last-ditch attempt to gain time and try to obtain the greatest possible number of dollars by taking advantage of the popularity of cryptocurrencies and perhaps of capital laundering because, well, who would put their dollars on the table? The fact is that if this crypto doesn't work, and that does look like the most plausible scenario, Maduro's regime will only have 3 options. First, accept some kind of internal revolt and leave power one way or another, which seems very difficult. Second, use an even tougher hand and condemn Venezuela to even greater humanitarian disaster. Or third, try to get the Chinese and Russians to buy the country's national resources en masse and by all means, such as their refineries, their oil, and maybe other raw materials. That is to say, they would essentially become a sort of colony by selling at a loss each and every one of their crown jewels so that the regime's elite can continue to enjoy their standard of living. So now today, Nicolás Maduro and company, they're still in power, and it hardly seems likely that Venezuela is going to have a better future. But now it's your turn. Would you be willing to exchange your money for Petro's? Well, leave your answer in the comments below, as well as in this survey. And I really do hope you enjoyed this video. Please do hit like if you did, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for brand new videos just like this every Monday and every Thursday. Also, don't forget to check out our friends at the Reconsider Media podcast. They provided the vocals in this episode that were not mine. And as always, thank you for watching.
Construyendo patria. Paso a paso vamos transitando el camino.